All right, that's our cue to start. So welcome everybody to the SnapPlus version 3 webinar that we have titled All Things Silurian for our Silurian Bedrock features in SnapPlus V3. My name is Hava Blair. I'm on the SnapPlus team, and I'm joined today for presenting this webinar by Calla Little, SnapPlus GIS developer, and Chris Clark with UW Extension. So what we have today is a session that is focused entirely on how to understand and use the new Silurian Bedrock features in SnapPlus version 3. So if you're here, you're probably familiar with what that means. We have added some new and expanded features that do compliance checks. We have some new types of mapping features and layers, and we have some new reports that are all intended to help you identify and meet the rules surrounding manure applications and restrictions for nutrient management planning in the Silurian Bedrock area in the state of Wisconsin. So the game plan today is a little bit different from the other webinars in our series. And what we decided to do was just devote a little bit more time to this formal presentation portion. So instead of taking 45 minutes to talk, I expect us to talk for an hour or maybe a little bit more today. Because we have this really focused and specific topic, I think it's valuable to keep everybody in the same room. We're going to record this and make it available for anybody who couldn't be here today to get their questions answered. So a lot of this stuff is new, especially for 590 farms that maybe have not yet had to fully implement or see some of this data in their nutrient management plans. So we want to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. The order of events is that first Cal is going to talk to us about maps and all these different types of map features and layers that are available. Then we'll hear from Chris, and then I'll end out the day talking about compliance and pre-tillage and reports. So that's our game plan. I'm going to do a quick switch over so that Calla can share her screen and we'll get started. At any point today, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We will try to monitor and then pause occasionally to address those. And then I do expect that we'll have time at the end to answer specific questions that come up too. So we've got an hour and a half planned for today. I think that should be more than enough to cover the content and then see what else comes up so that we can get your questions answered. So thanks for being here, and we'll do a quick switch so Calla can talk to us about maps.
Okay. So, as Hava said, I'm going to kind of kick this off with showing what the Silurian layers look like in V3 maps. I'll start off by saying that these fields are just some random fields I selected because they intersect the Silurian and are useful for demonstrating this, but this is not a real plan, so these are just some random fields here. Okay, so first things first, to turn on the Silurian layers, there is a group in the layers panel for Silurian Bedrock. You can turn them all in at once, and you'll get all of these kind of dot patterns showing up where there is Silurian. I'm going to open the legend so we can look at what these different depths look like. So we have the 0 to 2, which is this kind of red dotted pattern. We have the 2 to 5, which is this orange. And then the 5 to 20 is the kind of tan pattern. So the kind of general idea is that shallower bedrock is a kind of brighter, darker color, and then deeper bedrock is a lighter color, and your darker colors are the more restrictive layers. So they are hopefully easier to see, being that they are brighter. So you'll also see that in this field here, there is a manure prohibited area, and that is intersecting that 0 to 2 foot layer. So I'm going to turn that off so that we can actually see the layer there. So these do go into creating the manure prohibited areas. And I'll also real quickly show that for the winter manure prohibited areas, those will follow that 2 to 5 foot interval. Oh, and okay, so one layer I forgot to talk about here is the water table Silurian layer. So this is the blue dotted pattern. And these are areas where the water table is within 24 inches of the surface, and Silurian bedrock is within 20 feet of the surface. So these areas are also manure prohibited in the Silurian standard. These kind of intervals are probably familiar to anyone who worked with the Silurian layers in V2. It's the same um, breakout, like intervals, categories, but the extents have been updated with new data. So if you're comparing the Silurian layers between V2 and V3, they're going to look a little different as to which areas they're covering. So then the only other layer in here that I haven't talked about is the Silurian Bedrock depth sample layer. So this is a new layer for V3. And this is so that if you want to go out and verify your depths to bedrock in the field, you can import those GPS points into SnapPlus and use them to, remap the fields to match what you're actually seeing um, in your fields. So I know in V3, some people used soil sample points to do this. You don't have to do that anymore. So because we have this, new feature type. You can add them one by one if you go into the edit panel and go to Silurian Bedrock Depth Sample. You just add new, and you'll have to put your depth in inches. Once you save it and add it on the map, the label actually gets feet. And that's just to make it easier to kind of link like the point you're seeing to the depth interval that the standard calls out. So the data, the inches are still there. It's still 62 inches. It's just the label is in feet. So that's one option if you want to go through and add them one by one, but probably most of you do not want to do that. And what you want to do is import a shapefile. So that is also an option. You can go to the import export dialog, and we have the feature type Silurian Bedrock depth samples. Select that, get your zip file. And then you'll have to fill out the column map for which column in your shapefile contains the depth values. So again, this needs to be in inches, and it needs to be a numeric field, and it should be an integer. So rounded to the nearest inch. I'll hit that and import. And here are some sample points. You zoom in. So, again, these get this kind of same color scheme where you get the 0 to 2 is this red and the 2 to 5 as orange, and then, deeper than 5 feet is the tan color. One thing you are maybe noticing is that there is a 2 to 3 foot and a 3 to 5 foot category versus just our 2 to 5 foot in our base restriction layers. This is because the base restriction layers are created from data that is not as dense as what you're collecting when you're doing field verification. So it just was not possible to create that small of an interval when these are being created regionally. So that is why there's a 2 to 5 foot range for the base layers. But when you're mapping these on a field scale, you'll hopefully be able to break these out into these smaller categories because these categories are what the standard lays out. There are slightly different restrictions on the 2 to 3 foot versus 3 to 5 foot depths. So that is how you get your points into Snap Maps. You are maybe wondering like what you do now because these points don't match what the base restrictions are. You can see we have our 0 to 2 is more in this area, and then there's a 2 to 5 here, and there's some greater than 5 foot over here. So you probably want to be able to remap this field so that it matches what your depth samples say is there. We do have a process for this now for V3, which you can do by dismissing these base restriction layers and then redrawing in your bedrock layers based on the sample points you're seeing.
Ella, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have one quick request. Could you zoom your browser like one or two, like to
Oh, yeah.
120? I think especially the point labels are a little small. Thank you. I think that might help some people who are on laptops see. That's perfect.
Okay. Okay. Uh, Thanks for letting me know that. Um, okay, so for dismissing the base layers, you can go into the edit panel and there is this dismissed Silurian bedrock feature type. When you dismiss, you have to do it by the interval you're dismissing. So we'll start with the 0 to 2 foot and just add new. And I'm going to just draw a big box around this area that I'm dismissing. And I can do this because maps in the background is going to snap this shape to match where the field and this restriction intersect. So the alternative would be you'd have to sit here and try to click along the boundary and try to trace this exactly, and that would be really difficult. So this is the much faster and easier shortcut to just draw a box around the field boundary, around the shape you're trying to dismiss, and then hit save and you'll see that that shape just snapped to this red area. So you also see in the legend there's this little gray dots for dismissed Silurian uh, bedrock. So it's still back there. We can't just make it disappear, but it's kind of grayed out to show that it's dismissed. So now I'll go back and I'll also dismiss the 2 to 5 foot range that is sampled here. And again, I'm going to just draw a box around these parts. But when I get down here, I have to be more careful because I quit sampling right here. So I don't want to dismiss this area. I just need to dismiss where my samples are. So I'm going to trace along this line where my verification points end. And then I sampled all of this area so I can then go back to going around the field boundary and just letting the map snap that shape. Okay, so there we had it snap there and up here, and here it preserved that line so that I didn't dismiss this area. Okay, so those are now dismissed. If I go turn on my spreading layers, you'll see this is no longer manure prohibited. Um, the acres will have updated, restrictions, compliance. As far as SnapPlus is concerned, there is no Silurian here anymore. So you can get rid of it in that way, but we're not done because we still need to draw back the correct areas based on our sample points. So to do that, I'm going to zoom in here as far as I can. And I'll go back to the edit panel. And now there's this type for Silurian Bedrock. Click that, and when you add a new one, you have to select the depth range. So I'm going to start with the 0 to 2 foot, and I'll start drawing, and this one does not clip to the field boundary, so you're going to want to be a little more exact about where you're drawing when you're drawing it. And I'll go down and I'm going to look for these adjacent points where 2 feet fall in between them. So here's 1.3 and 2.4. I'm going to try to put this line where about I think 2 feet would fall in between these points. So it's going to be a little bit closer to the 2.4 point than the 1.3. And then here we have 1.3 and 2.1. So I would expect that the 2 is going to be very close to this point since it's hardly over 2. A 0.4 and a 2.1. Similarly, I'm going to keep hugging this 2. And then here we have a 1.8 and a 2.1. So that's more mid-range. So I'll just in this way keep kind of going around and making my best estimate based on, the distance between these adjacent points of where this line should go. And we'll just finish there. I'll double click and I'll hit save. And there is my new 0 to 2 foot contour for this field. Now I can go in and I can do the 2 to 3 foot. So for the next contour, I'm actually going to start it overlapping this shape I already drew. And that's because when I save it, the map will make sure that there's no overlap between them and it'll clip my new shape to match the boundary of this shape. So it's again a little shortcut so that you don't have to sit here and try to exactly trace this contour. You can just let the map figure out where that boundary should be. So for this one, I'm looking for points between 3 or greater than 3 feet. So I'm going to go down here and in a similar way, I'm not going to be super careful about this for this demonstration, but you'd want to do the same thing I just demonstrated where you're trying to figure out where the line should fall between these 2 points. And I'll trace the kind of field boundary here and capture all of my 2 to 3 foot points. And when I get done, I'm just going to go here and let that line be totally wrong. Hit save, and there you see it clipped it to match this one. So there, that is my 2 to 3 foot interval. You'll see that the style of it is a little different and not one we've seen yet. And so it has this orange background, like our base 2 to 5 layer, but it also has these little red dots in it to indicate that it's shallower. It's the 2 to 3 foot. I'll quickly draw the 3 to 5 foot so that you can see what that symbol looks like. Oops. So there's a 3 to 5 foot. Again, it has that orange background because it's still in that 2 to 5 foot interval, but it has tan dots in it, which are maybe hard to see on your screens, but there are little tan dots in it to indicate that it is a bit deeper. Okay, so oh yeah, and I'll also mention that you can do this in SnapPlus in maps, but you can also, if you want to do this in a GIS system where you have more tools and more functionality available, you also can import these depth ranges. You'll just need to have a column that tracks what depth range the polygon belongs to. So that is also an option. Okay, so um, I'm gonna, call this good for now. Obviously, you would need to keep, you know, drawing your contours until you were done drawing them to match your verification points. Um, but I also want to show you what happens with direct conduits to groundwater and concentrated flow channels in Silurian Bedrock. So I'm going to add a direct conduit to groundwater here. I'm going to say that this is a sinkhole. I don't know that this is a sinkhole, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to say it's a sinkhole. Hit save, and let me go turn on my buffers. So this is my manure prohibited buffer in the Silurian. It gets a 300-foot buffer. This is because in the standard, there is a 300-foot setback on areas that are upslope of a direct conduit to groundwater and a 100-foot setback on areas that are downslope. That is a really complicated thing to figure out programmatically. So Maps just defaults to using that 300-foot buffer around conduits. So if I turn on my spreading prohibited layers, you'll see that this whole area is prohibited. The other thing I'm going to show you are concentrated flow channels. So when you add a concentrated flow channel outside of the Silurian, like if I were adding one here, you just have to fill out the type and the width. If you add one that crosses the Silurian boundary, then you get this third column you have to fill out, and it's drains to direct conduit to groundwater. And what this is you need to say whether or not this concentrated flow channel is draining to a conduit. So in my example here, I have this grass waterway that is draining to this sinkhole. So I would have to select true for this. And the reason you need to do this is because there are a 100-foot setback on these concentrated flow channels that drain to direct conduits to groundwater. So if I go back into my layers panel and I turn on my channel buffers, I'll see I have this orange channel buffer, and that is the channel buffer around a channel that drains to conduits to groundwater. I'll turn on my spreading layers and you'll see that that area is also manure prohibited. Okay, so I think that that is everything I wanted to cover on the maps. I don't know if we want to pause if there are any questions before Hava takes over.
Yeah, let's pause since we're here. So obviously there's a lot of different types of new things and features going on in the maps. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I do want to offer if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question while we're still looking at this map together, Calla can show anything else that you might have questions about related to these features. We'll just give a moment for folks to think, and then if no questions, we'll transition to Chris. Okay, hearing nothing now, that's fine. Keep in mind that you can put questions in the chat if you think of something. We're happy to receive those. So now I'd like to turn the mic over to Chris Clark with UW Extension, and she's going to share a tip with us related to SnapPlus version 3.
All right, greetings everyone. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, it looks good, Chris. We're seeing your PowerPoint. And
Is it in the display mode too?
it's not in display mode yet. We're just seeing
Okay.
the regular, yeah. Now it looks good. We're seeing the display.
All right, awesome. All right, so my quick tip is we know that there are going to be some things that are pretty important that you're going to want to share with, custom manure haulers to the farm directly as they move into the Silurian areas and how Snap maps. And we've got a report that we can use, the SnapPlus report DD2, that opens up in Excel that we can do some modifications to that might be worthwhile to view. So you'll go to the reports tab up on the main page of SnapPlus, and then you'll scroll down on the left column and look for this DD2 applications data. Then it's going to ask you to open an Excel file. So you're going to want to be able to have Excel on your computer and view that Excel file. Within that, there's going to be some columns that we don't need. So if you're not using Excel a whole bunch, what you'll do is you'll click on that column going up and down. Usually at the top, you can do that. You will right click with your mouse and you can either completely delete it if that's information that you don't find necessary, or you can do the hide function. And that could be useful. So if you're thinking about what is the specific information that the manure hauler and the farmer need to know, I would say field name, the number of acres. We might want to put some slope information in there, particularly for some of the setbacks. But there's some other things that come through with this same report that we don't need. So feel free to delete and hide any of those. Then the next thing is there any type of sorting that you want to do? And this can be all over the board of what you may want to be able to provide. Are you going to sort it by the field name? Are you going to sort it by the ones that get the most manure first? Types of things. So in order to do that in Excel, you will look for this data tab. And then you're going to want to select some of the cells that you want to do. So a lot of times I just click the topmost left area and have it select everything. And then it's going to open up an additional sorting thing. If it's only just A to Z, there's these little shortcuts that are to the left of the sort button. You can use that to sort it alphabetically, but a lot of times we want to go into maybe a little bit more detail. So you're going to hit this sort, which is in the box, and this pop-up menu comes up for different functions. So here we'll be able to do beyond just alphabetically some different sorting for the Excel. Again, what is the most important information? Is it the rate of manure that you want put on? Is it some type of list of those that have restrictions that you want at the top of the list as you communicate with farmers? We also have the opportunity to really call attention to things like fields that should not get any manure, or that maybe are approaching that high soil test P for phosphorus levels. So to do some of the color coding, again, I know some of you might be Excel whizzes, but you may not necessarily use that every day in your job. You're going to select the row or the cells that you want to put some type of color to, and you can get to it really quickly from the home screen. And then there's this little paint bucket that looks like it's tipping over, and you can do that. Or if the cells that you have selected, again, you can use that right click on your mouse and it will pop open this box. And then you need to just slide over to the fill of the color selection and then decide how you want to alert the manure hauler to that. So here's an example. If we have phosphorus over 100 parts per million, we don't want any manure on them. I didn't have any in this list that had that, but we've got some phosphorus that are approaching 50 parts per million, and I just want to alert the farmer to that. So that's kind of in this red color. We've added some different columns in for some additional record keeping. As a nutrient management planner, I want to know what source that manure came from that's being spread on the field. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a blank here. I put the application rate, and then maybe what they did put on is an additional, it could be the same, but if it was something different, I want to have a spot for them to be able to do that. And then the season, was it spring or fall that they were actually able to spread that manure? So lots of different options here. And like I said, we want to make it as easy and call attention to what we need to say to those manure haulers. This again is an example of a more detailed one. It's got some color coding. And then I just kind of covered up some of the field names because this did come from another crop consultant of what I thought was a really good method for communicating additionally in there. So lots of things. They also added a column for what is the limiting factor, and that helps both the farmer and you as the planner, and just kind of help educate the manure haulers of why we can't have manure on those fields. Kala did talk about the maps, and we can use the title of the maps to help us communicate too. So this is some fields that I picked out that do have some Silurian features. We've got some sinkholes, we've got direct conduits to water, we've got some manure prohibited areas, but we also have areas that we can spread manure. So I called them the North Fields. I put the rate down there, and then also just called attention to these are the areas that should not get manure, so that they have a map of these 5 fields in this particular region that they might be spreading manure. Then what about how can we use that map title to communicate for some of the Silurian? So I think Hava will be explaining some of this next, so it'll be a great lead-in, but we've got this pre-tillage zone where I want to say we don't necessarily have to do it in the whole field for this demo field that I had. We need pre-tillage in this grayed out area, and then the rest of it, I do not want them to exceed that 6,750 gallons of liquid dairy manure. So how can you use those maps to be on specific, because it may not be every field, but maybe you've got one that we need to pay attention to for Silurian. I really think that this is a great group of people that if you have something to share and you think it's really working well with your farm and your manure haulers, please share your best tips, because this is how we keep giving agriculture a good positive name, is not as using this free program and then communicating it to the farm and to the spreaders so that we don't have mistakes. So please do share. We'd be happy to collaborate them together and share it back out too.
All right, that is fantastic. Thank you, Chris. While Chris was talking, we had 2 questions come into the chat, so I wanted to pause and address those before we move forward. And to answer the first question, I think, Kala, I'm going to pass that to you. The question itself is, what data is used to develop the base soil depth layers?
Yeah, so the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey worked on making the updated Silurian layers. And I can provide a link in the chat to their publication that explains how they did it and exactly what data sources they used, because there are a number of them, but the majority of them are from airborne electromagnetic surveys, and then well construction reports in the area, as well as some Surgo shallow soils data. So there are a number of different sources with varying, accuracies. And I'll put that in the chat. And I believe they also have, I'll see if I can find this as well. I believe they also have a map that shows their confidence level or the error level in certain areas of the state. So if you want to take a look at that and see if maybe you're in an area where there's less data or something, while you decide whether, you want to try to go out and field verify.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kala. And then another question that we got in the chat is, do we need to update our maps for each farm from the previous version? So that would be SnapPlus version 2, before we submit the NMP to the county for 2027. Also, does SnapMaps display the acres on the map? I'm going to answer the last question first because it's quite easy. So the last question is also, does Snap Maps display the acres on the map? The answer is yes, we are putting that update out probably sometime this week so that you will have a new labeling option to label the field name and the field acres and more. So that is a brand new labeling feature that's coming out with some other nice things, probably toward the end of this week. We wanted to get through this webinar before posting any site updates just to avoid any unintended hiccups. So good news there. Then the other part of that question, I wonder if Andrea wants to jump in, but I will do the best of my ability to answer. So the question was, do we need to update the maps for each farm from the previous version before we submit to the county in 2027? So I believe that the answer to this is yes, because the Silurian rules, when AtCap 50 was updated to incorporate the technical standard for implementing all these Silurian rules, there was a delayed implementation until April 1 of 2027. So if we're talking about submitting nutrient management plans for the 2027 crop year in that spring period, then I think, yes, you would want to go in and update your maps and make sure that for the farms that you're working with that are in these areas, that you are using the most recent data and the most recent maps. So it's important to understand that SnapPlus version 2 had some of these layers for shallow Silurian and had some of these rules incorporated, but SnapPlus version 3 is covering all of them. So you're going to see more specific messages, more specific compliance messages, more specific guidance messages. I will show some examples. So yes, that is recommended that you go in and transition to SnapPlus version 3 because it gives you the ability to show that you're meeting all of these new rules and some of these details, that in a way that SnapPlus version 2 does not have those same features and doesn't have the same updated map layers. So what Calla just said is important, that we've updated the Silurian map layers in SnapPlus version 3 using these new data layers that the Wisconsin Geologic and Natural History Survey has been working on. So that's more recent data. It's better data in many cases. It's more specific. So that's a really good idea to use those updated maps. Okay, great. Good questions. So I will transition to my part of the webinar here. I think Chris teed me up really well for the things that I want to talk about today. So I will be sharing with you some information about generally compliance and implementation messages, how to see them and what they mean in SnapPlus version 3. And then I want to talk specifically about pretillage, long-term no-till, and reports. So once we're outside of maps, I want to talk you through some of these other ways that you will see the Silurian rules implemented in SnapPlus version 3. So I am now showing my screen with a demo plan open. Again, these are just some fields that we picked off the map because they had some good examples of these restrictions. And then I've set up a few different crop rotations to illustrate some of these key points. And the first general question I want to answer is, what do these messages look like that you might see that are related to the Silurian restrictions? So a good place to see these is on the management page. And I've got one field here where I have some restrictions that are in the Silurian bedrock within 0 to 2 feet and 2 to 5 feet. So that's my field name. And when I open up my nutrient applications panel here, we can actually see what's going on this field in this mini map. So I have actually all 3 depth categories here. You can see the red, which is a 0 to 2, the 2 to 5, which is the orange, and then the 5 to 20, which is the lighter one. A good reminder is that any layers that you have turned on back on the fields page in the maps tab, those are going to be displayed in this mini map. So especially when you have these fields that have kind of a lot of stuff going on, I recommend going into maps and kind of fine tuning what is most helpful for you to see when you are going in and trying to plan nutrient applications on this field and figure this out. So I have the Silurian layers displayed here just as a reminder to myself about what's going on. I want to show you 2 different types of messages, and the first one is an implementation message. So one of the things that you'll notice with SnapPlus version 3 that's similar to SnapPlus version 2 is we use different colors to communicate about different types of messages. So in 2026, I have this corn grain crop planned on the field, and then I have a solid manure application planned in the spring, and it is incorporated. And on the same row with this manure application, I can see that I have a yellow circle with an exclamation point in it. And so that is an implementation message. It's providing more information for you. It's saying this you're not doing anything wrong, but there's some important information that you should know when you're implementing this plan related to this dairy solid manure application. That little yellow circle, when I click to expand the row under this more column, gives me my message, and it says, this field has an area with less than 2 feet of soil over Silurian bedrock, where manure application is not allowed. Check the spreading map before applications. So this is, again, a reminder, another way that SnapPlus version 3 is telling you the same type of information that you see on the map. So you can see that when I have selected this solid manure application here on this management page, SnapPlus is highlighting in the mini map these red restricted areas and saying, okay, you've planned this manure application. These red areas are where it can't go. So SnapPlus is assuming that you're not putting manure here. These are prohibited areas. Another thing that's new and displayed a little differently in SnapPlus version 3 is that when you do have these prohibited areas in the field, they could be related to Silurian features, they could be related to any other type of manure prohibition feature. You actually have the option to manage makeup applications. For example, maybe you have some fertilizer that will go on these areas where you can't spread manure. Those are managed in the tabs, the different tabs that are shown on the right side of the screen in this nutrient applications. So I'm currently looking at my spreadable tab. So all the applications I see here are going on my spreadable area in the season that I'm working in. So in the spring with solid manure, when I'm incorporating, I can spread throughout this area using those methods at that timing. That's fine. I can't spread in the red area. If I want to indicate that I have some type of makeup application fertilizer that's going on these red areas that can't receive manure, I would actually go over here and enter that in my No Manure tab. And it works exactly the same. I can add a fertilizer application. I don't have the add a manure application button here because this is a manure prohibited area. So manure is not an option, but I can still indicate that there might be a specific set of nutrient applications that are going on those red areas that we're seeing here. So that's a good illustration of an example of an implementation message that you might see show up with one of these yellow exclamation points. Compliance messages get the red color, red to bring it to your attention, like, hey, something's going on here, you've got to check this out. I can do the same thing clicking on the year that's affected. So I see this little red exclamation point. And then when I expand this nutrient application, I can see what the problem is. So I'm getting some information here saying this field is likely to have Silurian dolomite within 20 feet of the surface, and liquid manure must be injected or incorporated with pretillage if the field is not long-term no-till or in an established crop at the time of application. That's a long message, but it's intended to try to communicate the important parts of this specific rule and part of the rule to you. So because my field has these areas with shallow Silurian bedrock, so I have all three types here, all three depth categories, the fact that I have this liquid unincorporated application, that is a compliance issue. That needs to either be injected or incorporated with pretillage, since this field does not meet the definition of long-term no-till, and because I don't have an established crop at the time of application. So that's an example of a compliance message that you would see. One of the things that you'll notice is that these compliance messages, they're all specific to the different types of depth categories that you have in the field. So if you have multiple categories, like my example here, I have some 0 to 2 foot, some 2 to 5 foot, and some 5 to 20. I'm going to see multiple messages depending on what's relevant to this specific application. So sometimes you'll see them stacked because I have multiple things that are relevant to this particular field. All right, another really important thing to know about, and this is really relevant for people that are, in the process of making the transition from SnapPlus version 2 to SnapPlus version 3, is the timing of all of this. So, and what I mean by timing is, we know that the ATCAP 50 rule change and rule updates with this technical standard for implementing the Silurian rules, those happened in 2024. So in SnapPlus version 3, and I'm going to go to a field that has an example of this, if you have things going on before 2024, like applications that were happening before 2024, you're not going to get these compliance messages because that rule wasn't updated until 2020. ATCAP 50 updates didn't happen until 2024. So 2025 is the earliest that you're going to start seeing these like updated messages that I've been showing you. And that's primarily important for people if you're in the situation where you're importing a plan. You might have a bunch of history on that farm. And those messages, here's my Silurian example. I'm showing you an example now of how I might import a SnapPlus V2 database. Like, let's say I'm making my transition from V2 to V3. I can come in here and take a look at, I've got just one field, and I can take a look at what's going on in my field. Let's look at 2023. Let's see, 2024 is my example. So in 2024, I have a dairy liquid application that is in the spring. It's an unincorporated application. I'm not seeing any flags here. So that's 2023, that's 2024. It's before that those messages start to show up. 2025, I've got the exact same thing. I've got spring unincorporated liquid dairy manure application. Now I start to see these messages. So we turn those on just with the recognition that this rule got updated in 2024. So we're showing these messages that would be actionable if you had made the transition in 2025, and then into the future, you're going to continue to see them. And the reason we did that is that, you know, you might have a lot of years of history on this field before that those updates happened, and it's not really helpful. There's nothing you can do about applications that happened before then that would have been addressed in previous plan versions. So just make a mental note that you're going to start to see all these new messages starting in the 2025 crop year when you make that transition. So you can see here, I've got this unincorporated application, and I'm getting a bunch of different messages related to the types of restrictions that I happen to have on my test field. So that's another important thing to be aware of when you're making this transition. Now that we've talked kind of generally about compliance, I want to dig into how we meet the rules around pre-tillage. And to do that, I think it's helpful to actually jump out of SnapPlus version 3. And I want to show you a few slides that I've put together that really detail how this breaks down, because it's important to understand how SnapPlus version 3 thinks about pre-tillage and the way that this gets implemented behind the scenes when we're doing your soil loss calculations in the Russell 2 model. So if you'll bear with me while I do a quick transition, I want to just talk through some definitions, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how this looks in the program itself. Okay, so Chris gave us a brief intro to this, and I'm gonna remind us all what this pre-tillage means. So this definition of pre-tillage, it means using mechanical equipment to reduce preferential flow paths, wormholes, root holes, and cracks by turning and mixing the soil prior to and at least 2 inches below the depth of manure application. Okay, that's pre-tillage. The first important thing to know about the way that pre-tillage works in SnapPlus is that SnapPlus does not do any checks related to depth of tillage. That's not really feasible. How you run a tillage implement can change the depth. So we don't do checks based on depth, but we do checks based on the type of tillage system and the timing that you've selected. Could that be compatible with pre-tillage? So that's the first important thing to know. What are your pre-tillage options? So in SnapPlus version 3, I'll show you in the manure application method drop-down menu. For pre-tillage, you're going to see 2 main options: pre-tillage plus injection and pre-tillage plus incorporation. So those are 2 different manure application methods. And the only time you see those are if you actually have a field that has some area overlapping with that Silurian bedrock, you know, within 2 to 20 feet of the surface. And if you have at least 1 tillage operation in the season of application. And I'm going to get into more about what that means in just a minute. So this really gets into the SnapPlus definitions of what do these different tillage systems mean. Some of them have multiple tillage passes. Some of the tillage passes are in the fall, some might be in the spring, and some of our systems have passes or operations just in the fall or just in the spring. So I have a reminder on this screen that we can also put in the chat. If you need a reminder about SnapPlus tillage definitions, we do have a breakdown of those, and then you'll get a little sense of that in my next few examples. So breaking down, what do we mean by pre-tillage plus injection? What's happening behind the scenes here is that SnapPlus puts that manure injection operation. So when you say I'm applying with pre-tillage plus injection, it puts it after the relevant tillage operation that you've selected. So if you've selected, fall chiseled disked plus spring injection, SnapPlus is going to put the injection after that disk operation to make sure that you're meeting that pre-tillage rule of having the tillage happen before the manure application. Pre-tillage and incorporation, the way that that looks in SnapPlus, it depends on the exact tillage system that you've picked. And this again gets into what seasons do you actually have tillage operations happening on the field. If you pick a type of tillage system that has just one pass in the season that you're putting on that manure, SnapPlus is going to add an extra disking operation to make sure that you can do the pre-tillage before the manure application. If you have 2 or more passes that are already in that season that you're applying the manure, SnapPlus just puts the manure on in between, and that means you still meet that pre-tillage requirement of having the tillage happen before the manure. So that was a lot of words. I have some nice diagrams that'll help maybe explain this a little bit better. So let's start with this explanation of we have this fall chisel no disc tillage system. That's an example of a tillage system in SnapPlus. Before we add any manure, the way that this looks behind the scenes is that we have a fall chisel plow pass, and in the spring we have a disc and a field cultivation. What happens when we add a liquid manure application in the Silurian? If we do that in the fall, what we see is that the manure goes on in the fall, and then we have a green arrow there that indicates, okay, this is my disking that's happening. I've got a disc operation that's added before the manure to make sure that I am getting and meeting that pre-tillage requirement. Yeah. What if we change it to a spring application? So now I've got the same tillage system. I've still selected fall chisel disc, but my manure is going on in the spring. Well, in the spring, you actually already have 2 passes just as a function of how this tillage system is defined. You've got your disc and your field cultivation. So SnapPlus sandwiches the manure in between those to make sure that you're meeting that pre-tillage requirement. All right, now let's look at injected. So I'm changing up, we went from incorporated to injected as our method, this pre-tillage plus injected option that you'll see. Now, if I stick with my fall chisel disc system, just staying with that one system, we see that the manure injection comes after that initial chisel plow pass. And then I have my 2 passes in the spring. Let's change it up to a spring system. So I've been talking just about that fall chisel no disc system. What about the spring chisel no disc system in SnapPlus? That is defined as a chisel plow followed by a field cultivation pass. If we start to bring liquid manure into the mix in the Silurian, if I try to add a fall manure application on a field in the Silurian with this tillage system selected, I'm going to go to the method drop down to say, okay, how am I applying my manure? And I'm actually only going to see this unincorporated option because there aren't any tillage. There's no tillage selected in my system that could be used to meet that pre-tillage requirement. So I'm going to see a restriction in my methods in terms of what type of method I could use. If I want to put it on in the fall, I need to make sure I pick a sort of base tillage system for that crop that actually has fall tillage passes, so I can meet that requirement and SnapPlus can show that I'm meeting that requirement. And then finally, we have these exceptions in the Silurian rules that are related to established crops. So let's imagine that I have alfalfa on a field. It's an established stand of alfalfa, and I add an unincorporated, so a surface manure application. I will see that unincorporated method in the dropdown, and then SnapPlus will not flag because I'm meeting that exception for my manure surface applied to an established crop. So that's an example of how that would work. All right, let's change back to SnapPlus. I want to show you what this actually looks like in the application now that maybe we have a little better visual about what SnapPlus is doing behind the scenes. So I will share a different screen here. All right, fantastic. Let's see. Let's head back. I'm going to head back to the plan that I had originally open here for us to look at and look at a couple examples. So if we look in 2027, this is similar to some of the PowerPoint slides that I was just showing. So I have this soybeans fall chisel disc system, and I have a dairy liquid manure application. Because I wanted to show you some compliance messages, I made this an unincorporated application. So I'm getting these flags. But if I open up this method dropdown that shows my different options for the method that I'm using to apply the manure application, here's where we start to see those different pre-tillage options show up. So I'm seeing I could do unincorporated or surface application, pre-tillage plus injected, and then these two different pre-tillage plus incorporation timing options. So I'm seeing those show up because this field is in this Silurian bedrock area. I have some of these restricted areas, and because I've selected this tillage system where I have tillage passes available to me in the spring when I want to put on this manure that will allow me to meet that pre-tillage requirement. So those things have to be true in order for the pre-tillage to show up. There are areas in these in counties that are maybe impacted. Some parts of the county are impacted by these Silurian areas. If your particular field doesn't actually have an overlapping area that's impacted by that, you won't see the pre-tillage options. So SnapPlus is checking and seeing, do you actually have some of these Silurian restricted areas before it shows you these different options. Next, I want to show you an example again, just highlighting that this tillage system that you pick is really important to think about when you think about what methods are being used and available to you. Here in 2028, I have this corn grain selected with a no-till tillage. So when I go here and look at my methods that I have available to me, the only two that I see for my dairy liquid application in the spring are unincorporated. And then I also see this low disturbance injected. So I want to highlight that because SnapPlus version 3 has two different injection options. We have the low disturbance injection and we have the regular injection. SnapPlus version 2 just had the one. So that's important to know because low disturbance injection can be used on fields that have already met the long-term no-till status and allow a field to keep that long-term no-till status. And that's what I want to talk about next. So one of the important exceptions in the Silurian rules related to surface applications of liquid manure is that if your field qualifies as long-term no-till, then you can make these surface applications as long as you meet these other requirements and restrictions. So there's rate restrictions that are important to know about. I just want to talk about application method right now. So let's just talk quickly about what does SnapPlus do to check long-term no-till status. And this is true in the Silurian and also true in other parts of the application. What SnapPlus does is it looks at the last crop year where your field had tillage. So on this field in 2023, I had a fall cultivation pass. So crop year 2023 for SnapPlus, okay, that counts as tillage. Let's say that I want to look out here in 2027 and plan a manure application. When I'm putting on a surface manure application in 2027, what SnapPlus is checking for is, do I have no tillage in the current year? So I'm currently working in 2027, and it counts back 3 years, because for long-term no-till status, you need to have those 3 years of no-till. So SnapPlus is saying, okay, I'm no-till in 2027, that's good. Now we're going to count back 1, 2, 3 years. So because those 3 years are also no-till, it could be no-till green too. We have some no-till green options. So that would also qualify. Or it could be, established crops, but there needs to be no tillage on the field in the current year and then the previous 3 years. And then SnapPlus says, okay, counts as long-term no-till. Because it counts as long-term no-till, I can have a surface liquid application that meets the rate restrictions and I'm not getting a flag. If I look back at what's happening in 2025, just as a comparison, in 2025, I've got the same application, liquid, spring, surface, or unincorporated at 6,000 gallons. This does receive a flag because we're not yet meeting the requirements for long-term no-till. And that's exactly what my message says. It says this field is likely to have Silurian dolomite within 20 feet of the surface, and liquid manure must be injected or incorporated with pre-tillage if the field is not long-term no-till or established. So that is how SnapPlus is counting to figure out your long-term no-till status. Once you meet long-term no-till status, once you meet that requirement like we did in 2027, then going forward, you can use up to 1 low disturbance manure injection in a given year and still keep that long-term no-till status and have that be an okay application. So that's why I put an application here in 2029 that says a dairy liquid application in spring season. I'm using this special new low disturbance injected option because behind the scenes, we already know that we've met this long-term no-till status, and this is a low disturbance application. I'm not getting a flag here on this in the Silurian. But first I had to have met that long-term no-till status for this to work. All right, I'm gonna pause. I think I saw a few things in the chat. I think I might look at those and see if they're good things to address now or hold them until I get done with my next portion here. So yes, great question from Amy that relates to long disturbance or low disturbance manure injection. Sorry, I'm gonna talk about that. So Amy says, does the LDMI option only show up on long-term no-till fields? Would be great if it could be chosen for other fields, as farms without Silurian dolomite are getting NRCS cost share for this process, and this would track it accurately. So it shows, Amy, it shows up on any no-till or strip till field. So it does not have to be long-term. The long-term thing I was emphasizing here is simply because that relates to the compliance in the Silurian. But if I were to go out and just do, any old farm, like one in Arlington, and let's make it so that this is not long-term no-till. Let's put a chisel disc here. So this field does not qualify for long-term no-till. I can pick my manure, and I do get my two injection options here. So this is what I'm illustrating here, is that I have this no-till crop. I've got an application. I'm not in the Silurian. We're taking a brief aside here. Now I can show a distinction between a low disturbance injected application and an injected application. So answer is yes. This is not only a long-term no-till thing. It's not only a Silurian thing. This is something that's available across the application. All right, great. That looks good for now. I see there's been some other good questions and answers in the chat. I want to pivot to talking about reports. So let's get back to one of our Silurian farms here. And I want to show you 3 different reports that are relevant for Silurian information. The first one, I think we're going to start at the top, is this new report that's the NM1 farm narrative. So this is a report that is generated as a Word document. We worked really closely with DATCAP on this report, and the purpose of it is to pull together information that might be helpful to county reviewers when they're reviewing plans. So some of the information that you see on this report is also appearing elsewhere, but the idea is that this kind of summarizes things related to the fields and gives a nice overview of what's going on with this farm. We have added some information about Silurian to this report that I want to show you. So when I generate the report, I get a Word document that is downloaded onto my machine. And when I open that up, I'll make it a little bit bigger here. So this is my farm narrative report. Most of this information is provided for all farms. I want to call your attention down below to one section that we have called the Silurian Bedrock Performance Standards section. And this is a list of fields. So it just says the following field boundaries fall in the Silurian Bedrock area. And then it's showing me these are my field names of these 3 fields that we've been looking at on my demo farm. So this is a reminder, especially when you're looking at plans that might have fields that are located in multiple counties. Some of those counties have areas that fall in the Silurian Bedrock area or outside of it. This is just one quick way, one reminder to a plan reviewer that, hey, we have some fields that are affected by this. This is important to know about. The next report that gets into a little bit more detail about this is this new NM10 Silurian report. So this is a new report in SnapPlus version 3. It did not exist in version 2, and it's downloadable as a spreadsheet. And when you do that, you can see I had my downloaded pop up here as an Excel file. I'll open it up and show you what kind of information you get here. This is a much more detailed breakdown of your fields and the different types of restrictions and things going on. So I'm looking at this Excel sheet and I have 3 rows, 1 row per field. I've got my field name, my county, my cropping acres, and then I've got a bunch of different breakdowns here for the acres that are in these different types of prohibited or restricted areas. So I see that I have manure prohibited acres. I have my acres that are specifically Silurian bedrock within 0 to 2 feet, and how many acres within that field fall into that category. Same thing with acres with Silurian bedrock 2 to 5 feet, 5 to 20. And then there's a column here where if I had indicated that this field had a channel, a concentrated flow channel going to a direct conduit to groundwater, which is what Kala demonstrated for us, then I would have a check mark. I would have an X here indicating that yes, this field has one of those features. There's 3 other columns that are blank that I want to explain. So the risk ranking I'm going to save for last. And then I also want to talk about verified and dismissed. So one of the things that Kala demonstrated in the maps was number 1, how to add these Silurian bedrock area depth verification points. So those are your point data about the depth to Silurian bedrock that you've gone out and you've called that field verified. If those point features exist in the field, like Kala showed us for her demo fields, then there would be an X here. So this is just a quick way for somebody to know, without necessarily going through all the maps in front of them, which of these fields that are in the Silurian bedrock area have some depth verification points that are entered in SnapPlus, just to help benefit and think about the review process and double checking those maps. As a second column, we also indicate if a given field that has these Silurian restrictions, if any of those restriction areas have been dismissed by the user. So this is something that you would expect to happen if you were going through the process that Kala showed us, where you've gone out to the field, you've got your depth verification points, you have entered them into SnapPlus, or you've uploaded them, maybe you did them in a different GIS. And then in order to draw your updated maps that reflect your data that you collected in the field, what you first had to do was dismiss those existing restriction areas where you have verification data, because your goal is to use your field data, which we know is going to be more accurate than the map data, in order to draw accurate depth categories and those contours that Kala was talking about. So this column exists, again, just as a helper to say, okay, if somebody has provided verification points and they've dismissed certain areas of Silurian bedrock, then that gives us some indication that they've probably gone in and drawn their updated areas. And that would be something to check on to make sure that this whole process was completed and that the data you expect to see is there. So this report is a helpful checklist and summarizes a lot of this information in one place. And the final column that we've added here that will always be blank, because this is something for you to fill in, there's some flexibility in the rule in terms of how this is used, is this column that's called risk ranking. So if you look closely at the Silurian rules, it recommends that when you have fields that you're spreading on that are in the Silurian bedrock area, you should try to prioritize and have some type of ranking that recognizes that some fields might present a greater risk for spreading and having that spreading reach groundwater compared to others. So the way that this risk ranking is done is could be done a couple different ways. I think this report could be a good starting point, because one way to think about risk ranking is, okay, I recognize that some fields might have a lot of acres in this shallowest category. So those are probably not the fields that I would prioritize. Those would be riskier fields. So risk ranking could be filled out with numbers, with categories. That's really just a tool that you can use to meet that requirement of the rule that there be a ranking of field risk. And you could do that right in this Excel spreadsheet, kind of type it in, and that would be one way to keep track of that. The final report that I want to show you is probably one that we're all familiar with. It's this 590 checklist. Now that we have an updated 590 checklist that is specific to the Silurian area, what you're going to notice when you go out and fill out this report in these plans that have that Silurian bedrock is you're going to see some additional questions and actually an additional section on your checklist form that reflect the Silurian checks. So I want to walk through this together and just show you what this looks like. We have this updated workflow in SnapPlus version 3 when you're running your checklist that you can go through and answer some of these questions. That these were things that SnapPlus can't always answer for you. So in version 2, you would download the Word document and go through and check some of these things that SnapPlus can't automatically check. We've updated that here so that you can step through this and get those pieces of information filled out. And that way, when you download the Word document, it's pretty much ready to go other than a double check and a signature. So as you watch me go through these different questions, that's what's happening behind the scenes here is this is all the information that you would have to fill out anyway on a form. And I am just going to put in some test data here so we can keep moving forward. So when you're doing this for the first time, if you don't have data entered, like I don't have data entered, you will have to enter it here. And then we can go through. And I picked a goofy example. Please forgive me for this brief aside. I'm using a demo account that doesn't have a qualification type entered. All right. Sorry about this, everybody. One second. This is me. I'm using a different plan than I normally use. Okay, so I got a certified planner. Now I'm going to go through to these questions. So the first couple questions, these are questions that everybody get. They're in section 1 of the 590 checklist. So I'm going to answer these kind of quickly because they're not specific to the Silurian. You will see these on the checklist and you can review them in detail if you wish. So I'm just going to keep moving through until we get to section 3 because that's the Silurian specific section. So here we are in section 3A. I have my first question. So a lot of these are coming directly from the Silurian rule, and we're going through, and some of these things are things that SnapPlus can't check for, but they're included in the checklist. So we have you answer them as you go through this process. So we're acknowledging here that, mechanical manure applications should not cause fecal contamination of water in a well. Okay. So I'm going to go through, I get these different questions that are ones that you need to answer. So this one, I won't read the whole thing out loud, but this is talking about that evaluation and ranking for risk of pathogen delivery for groundwater. So we looked at that risk ranking column in that spreadsheet. So I can go through and answer these questions and say, okay, do not headland stack on soils with 5 feet or less to Silurian bedrock. Make no mechanical manure applications. So you'll walk through these questions, you'll read through them. These are all specific to Silurian plans. So once you have completed these, I'm going to click through the rest of them here and show you the final checklist. So these are walking through, again, all these different types of restrictions that are relevant in the rule. When you get to the very end and you download your checklist, you will see that you have a checklist that has sections 1 and 2 and 3. So it's a different version of the checklist. It's technically a different form that is relevant specifically to these Silurian plans that have fields with the Silurian bedrock area. So when I open up my checklist and go to section 3 here, 1, 2, 3. This section applies to all crop producers and livestock producers applying manure on fields with less than 20 feet to Silurian bedrock. So that has all of those questions that we talked through. And then finally, just a reminder in general that you do need to apply a signature here. So SnapPlus does not put a signature on this form. All right. I see it's 12:15. That is the end of what I had to present today. I'm going to open up my notes on the side just to make sure I didn't forget to share anything with you. And then I will open it up to questions. I'm taking a look at the chat, and I think we covered questions in the chat. Calla shared some information about the map data. I think we've covered that. I think I'll just say that out loud in case people aren't watching the chat. We did have a question that was whether the new Silurian layers are available for download for GIS outside of SnapPlus or SnapMaps. And Calla answered yes and provided that link. So you can find them in a geodatabase on DATCAP's open data website, and that link is in the chat. So the answer to that is yes. And that's all the questions that I see. So I'll maybe wait a minute in case people are thinking and have further questions. And if not, we'll end a few minutes early today.